Captain Maria Rodriguez had been flying military aircraft for 12 years, but she'd never experienced anything quite like what happened at Fort Davidson that Tuesday morning in March. The incident would become legendary among the aviation community, shared in hushed tones and knowing glances whenever someone mentioned the dangers of assuming rank based on appearance. Maria stood 5 feet 4 inches tall, with dark hair pulled back in regulation style, and the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of commanding respect in male-dominated spaces. She wore her flight suit without any visible rank insignia, as was common during pre-flight preparations. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac as she walked toward her assigned aircraft, a sleek fighter jet that gleamed under the early light. The trouble began when Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, recently transferred from a desk job to flight operations, spotted Maria approaching the aircraft. Jennifer had been struggling to establish authority in her new position and had developed a habit of challenging anyone she perceived as stepping out of line. She was tall, blonde, and carried herself with the rigid posture of someone trying too hard to prove their worth. "Excuse me," Jennifer called out, her voice sharp and authoritative. "This is a restricted area. You need proper authorization to be here." Maria paused, turning to face the sergeant with raised eyebrows. She'd been walking toward her own aircraft, the one she'd been assigned to fly for a critical training mission. The morning briefing had covered weather conditions, flight patterns, and coordination with multiple ground units. Everything was perfectly routine until this moment. "I'm sorry," Maria replied, her tone calm but questioning. Jennifer stepped closer, her chest puffed out with artificial confidence. "I said this is a restricted area. Unless you have proper clearance and rank authorization, you need to leave immediately. This isn't a place for civilians or low-ranking personnel to wander around." The assumption hit Maria like a physical blow. She'd encountered this type of prejudice before, but never quite so blatantly. Jennifer had looked at her and seen someone who didn't belong, someone who couldn't possibly have the authority to be near military aircraft. The sergeant's eyes held a mixture of suspicion and disdain that spoke volumes about her preconceptions. "I see," Maria said slowly, her voice remaining steady despite the anger building inside her chest. "And what makes you think I don't belong here?" Jennifer's jaw tightened. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but I'm responsible for security in this area. I'm Staff Sergeant Walsh, and I'm telling you to leave. Now." The demand hung in the air between them, heavy with implication and assumption. Maria felt the familiar weight of having to prove herself, of being judged by her appearance rather than her qualifications. She'd earned her rank through years of dedication, skill, and leadership, but none of that seemed to matter to the woman standing before her. Around them, other personnel went about their morning routines, unaware of the confrontation brewing on the tarmac. The control tower loomed in the distance, its windows glinting in the morning sun. Soon, very soon, Jennifer Walsh would learn exactly who she was challenging. "Staff Sergeant Walsh," Maria began, her voice taking on the unmistakable tone of command. "I think there's been a misunderstanding here." Staff Sergeant Walsh's face flushed red as she stepped even closer to Maria, her voice rising with each word. "There's no misunderstanding here. I don't care who you think you are or what connections you might have. This is a secure military installation, and I have the authority to remove unauthorized personnel. You're clearly not military material." The insult was deliberate and cutting. Jennifer's eyes swept over Maria's appearance with obvious disdain, taking in her smaller stature and assuming weakness where there was actually strength. She'd made the fatal error of equating physical appearance with capability and rank. "Not military material," Maria repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "That's an interesting assessment, Sergeant. Tell me, what exactly makes someone military material in your expert opinion?" Jennifer's confidence seemed to grow with what she perceived as Maria's compliance. "Well, for starters, they'd have the proper bearing, the right attitude. They'd understand chain of command and respect authority when they see it. They certainly wouldn't be wandering around restricted areas without proper identification." The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. Here was Jennifer, lecturing about chain of command and respect for authority, while simultaneously disrespecting a superior officer based on nothing more than physical appearance and gender bias. "I see," Maria nodded thoughtfully. "And you believe you have the authority to determine who belongs here and who doesn't." "That's exactly right," Jennifer snapped. "I'm the ranking NCO in this area and I'm telling you to leave. If you refuse to comply, I'll have to call security and have you forcibly removed. Don't think I won't do it." The threat hung in the air like a challenge. Maria felt a mix of emotions churning inside her: anger at the blatant disrespect, frustration at having to deal with this when she had important duties to attend to, and a growing sense of anticipation for what was about to unfold. "Before you make that call," Maria said calmly, "perhaps you should ask yourself one question. What if you're wrong? What if the person you're threatening to have removed actually outranks you significantly?" Jennifer's laugh was harsh and dismissive. "Right. And I suppose you're going to tell me you're some kind of high-ranking officer. Look, lady, I've been in the military long enough to spot the real deal. You don't have the look, the bearing, or the authority. Nice try, though." The assumption was so complete, so arrogant, that Maria almost felt sorry for what was about to happen. Almost. The sergeant had been given multiple opportunities to reconsider her position, to perhaps ask questions before making demands. Instead, She'd chosen to double down on her prejudice. The look, Maria raised an eyebrow. I'm curious about that. What exactly should a military officer look like, in your professional opinion? Jennifer's expression grew more contemptuous. They should look like they belong here, like they've earned their place through strength and dedication, not through some diversity program or political correctness initiative. The words hit like a slap, revealing the depth of Jennifer's bias and the ugly assumptions underlying her behavior. Maria felt her jaw clench, but she maintained her composure. Years of dealing with similar attitudes had taught her patience and the value of choosing her battles carefully. Maria looked at Jennifer for a long moment, studying the sergeant's face and seeing the absolute certainty written there. It was the kind of certainty that came from never having been seriously challenged, never having been forced to confront the possibility of being completely wrong about something fundamental. Sergeant Walsh, Maria said finally, her voice carrying a new edge of authority. I think it's time we resolved this situation properly. Since you're so concerned about proper procedures and chain of command, let's follow protocol exactly as it should be followed. Jennifer's eyes narrowed suspiciously. What do you mean? I mean that before you continue making demands and threats, you should probably verify exactly who you're dealing with. Standard operating procedure, wouldn't you agree? The suggestion seemed to give Jennifer pause for the first time. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her features, quickly replaced by renewed stubbornness. Fine, show me your ID. But I'm warning you, if you're trying to pull something over on me, it's not going to work. Maria reached into her pocket and pulled out her military identification card, holding it just out of Jennifer's immediate reach. Before I show you this, I want you to understand something very clearly. When you see what's on this card, you're going to have a choice to make. You can acknowledge your error, apologize, and learn from this experience. Or you can continue to dig yourself deeper into a hole that's already going to have consequences for your career. Jennifer's hand shot out impatiently. Just show me the damn card. Maria handed over the identification, watching carefully as Jennifer's eyes focused on the information displayed there. The change in the sergeant's expression was immediate and dramatic. Her face went from flushed red to pale white in a matter of seconds. Her hands began to shake slightly as she read and reread the rank and name printed on the card. Captain Rodriguez, Jennifer whispered, her voice barely audible. That's correct, Maria confirmed. Captain Maria Rodriguez, your superior officer. The same Captain Rodriguez who has been assigned to fly that aircraft you've been trying to keep me away from. The same Captain Rodriguez who has been standing here listening to you lecture about military bearing and proper authority. Jennifer's mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish gasping for air. her entire worldview crumbling in the span of a few seconds. The identification card trembled in her hands as the full weight of her mistake began to sink in. I didn't, Jennifer stammered, her voice barely a whisper. You didn't what? Maria asked, her tone sharp and demanding. You didn't think to ask before making assumptions. You didn't consider that your prejudices might be clouding your judgment. You didn't think that maybe, just maybe, you should show some respect before making threats. The questions hit like hammer blows, each one driving home the magnitude of Jennifer's error. Around them, other personnel had begun to notice the commotion, though they maintained enough distance to avoid directly interfering in what was clearly a disciplinary situation. Captain, I sincerely apologize, Jennifer finally managed to say, her voice cracking with emotion. I made a terrible mistake. I should have asked for identification first. I should have shown proper respect. Maria studied Jennifer's face, seeing genuine remorse mixed with fear and embarrassment. The sergeant's entire demeanor had changed completely, her artificial confidence replaced by the knowledge that she'd just committed a serious breach of military protocol and respect. Yes, you should have, Maria agreed. But your apology, while noted, doesn't erase what just happened here. You made assumptions about my capabilities and my right to be here based on nothing more than your own biases. That's not just a mistake, Sergeant. That's a fundamental failure of leadership and military bearing. Jennifer nodded miserably, clearly understanding that her actions had consequences beyond just personal embarrassment. Yes, ma'am, I understand. Do you? Maria asked. Because I'm not sure you fully grasp what just occurred here. You didn't just disrespect me personally. You disrespected the uniform, the rank, and everything that military service stands for. You let your prejudices override your training and your duty. The words hung heavy in the morning air. Jennifer stood at attention now, her body language completely transformed from the aggressive posture she'd maintained just minutes earlier. The change was so dramatic it would have been almost comical if the situation weren't so serious. I need to report to my aircraft now, Maria continued. This conversation isn't over, but my duties come first. We'll discuss this further after I complete my mission. Is that understood? Yes, ma'am, Jennifer replied, her voice barely audible. Maria turned to walk toward her aircraft, but paused after a few steps. Sergeant Walsh. Yes, ma'am. In the future, remember that military bearing isn't about what someone looks like. It's about how they conduct themselves, how they treat others, and how they uphold the values of our service. You might want to reflect on that. With that, Maria continued toward her aircraft, leaving Jennifer standing alone on the tarmac, still clutching the identification card and struggling to process what had just happened. But the morning's events were far from over, and the real lesson was yet to come. As Maria approached her aircraft, she could see her ground crew making final preparations. The sleek fighter jet gleamed in the morning sun, its sophisticated systems humming quietly as they warmed up for the mission ahead. She'd flown this particular aircraft dozens of times before, knew every switch and gauge by heart. Technical Sergeant Mike Thompson, her crew chief, saluted as she approached. "Good morning, Captain. Aircraft is ready for your mission. All systems check out green." "Thank you, Mike," Maria replied, returning the salute. "Any issues I should know about?" "No, ma'am. Everything's running smooth. Weather looks good for your flight profile, too." Maria nodded and began her pre-flight inspection, walking around the aircraft with practiced eyes checking every surface, every connection, every potential issue. It was a ritual she'd performed thousands of times, but she never took it for granted. Attention to detail could mean the difference between a successful mission and disaster. Behind her, she could sense Jennifer's presence, still standing where she'd left her. The sergeant hadn't moved, hadn't attempted to leave or continue with her duties. She simply stood there, presumably trying to process the enormity of her mistake. "Mike," Maria said quietly to her crew chief, "do you know Staff Sergeant Walsh, the new transfer working flight operations?" Thompson glanced toward Jennifer, then back to Maria. "Yes, ma'am. She's been asking a lot of questions about procedures, seems pretty eager to establish herself." "Why?" "No particular reason," Maria replied. "Just curious about how she's fitting in." Thompson's expression suggested he had more to say about Jennifer's adjustment period, but he kept his thoughts to himself. Military protocol discouraged gossip about personnel, especially between ranks. Maria completed her inspection and climbed into the cockpit, settling into the familiar seat and beginning the startup sequence. The aircraft systems came alive around her, displays lighting up and engines beginning their distinctive whine. She'd always loved this moment, the transition from ground-bound human to aerial predator. As she went through her pre-flight checklist, Maria could see Jennifer through the canopy, still standing motionless on the tarmac. The sergeant's face was a mask of misery and embarrassment. Her earlier confidence completely evaporated. It was almost painful to watch, but Maria reminded herself that some lessons could only be learned through experience. The radio crackled to life in her headset. "Dragon 2-7, this is Fort Davidson Tower. Are you ready for taxi clearance?" Maria keyed her microphone. "Fort Davidson Tower, Dragon 2-7 is ready for taxi." "Dragon 2-7, taxi to runway 09 via taxiway Alpha. Wind is calm, visibility unlimited. Contact ground control on 121.9er. Copy, taxi runway 09 via Alpha. Contact ground on 121.9er. Dragon 2-7." As Maria began to taxi toward the runway, she caught one last glimpse of Jennifer through her canopy. The sergeant was watching the aircraft move, her face a picture of dawning realization. Soon, very soon, she would understand the full implications of her morning encounter. The taxi to the runway was routine, following the painted lines and responding to ground control's instructions. Maria felt the familiar anticipation building as she approached the threshold, the excitement that came with every flight regardless of how many times she'd done it before. Dragon 27, contact tower on 126.2 for takeoff clearance. Copy, contacting tower on 126.2. Dragon 27. Maria switched frequencies and waited for the controller's voice. What happened next would become the stuff of base legend, a story that would be told and retold whenever someone needed an example of why assumptions could be dangerous. Fort Davidson Tower, Dragon 27 ready for takeoff. The controller's voice came back immediately, crisp and professional. Dragon 27, you are cleared for takeoff runway 09. Winds calm, contact departure control after takeoff on 124.7. Cleared for takeoff runway 09. Contact departure on 124.7. Dragon 27. Maria advanced the throttles and felt the aircraft surge forward, acceleration pressing her back into her seat. The runway lights flashed past in a blur as she gained speed, the aircraft eager to leave the ground behind. At rotation speed, she pulled back on the stick and felt the smooth transition from ground to air. Dragon 27 is airborne, she radioed. Roger, Dragon 27. Contact departure control, good flight. As Maria climbed away from the field, she could see the base growing smaller beneath her. Somewhere down there, Jennifer Walsh was probably still standing on the tarmac, still trying to process what had just happened. But the real shock was yet to come. The mission itself was routine. A training flight involving coordination with ground units and practice with various tactical scenarios. Maria flew with the precision and skill that had earned her respect throughout her career, executing each maneuver with the kind of professional competence that came from years of experience. But as she flew, her mind kept drifting back to the morning's encounter. Jennifer's assumptions, her arrogance, her complete certainty that she was right, it all painted a picture of someone who had never been seriously challenged or corrected. The sergeant had been so confident in her prejudices that she'd been willing to threaten a superior officer based on nothing more than appearance. The irony was particularly striking given Jennifer's lectures about military bearing and proper authority. She demonstrated neither, instead showing exactly the kind of behavior that had no place in a professional military environment. Her actions had been driven by bias, not by any genuine concern for security or proper procedure. Maria completed her training objectives and began the return flight to base. The aircraft handled beautifully, responding to her inputs with the kind of precision that made flying such a joy. She'd always felt most at home in the cockpit, where performance mattered more than perception, where skills spoke louder than stereotypes. As she approached the field for landing, Maria could see the familiar layout of Fort Davidson spread out below her. The runway stretched out like a ribbon of concrete, surrounded by hangars and support buildings. Somewhere in that maze of structures, Jennifer Walsh was presumably continuing her duties, still unaware of what was about to happen. Fort Davidson Tower, Dragon 27, is 10 miles south, requesting landing clearance. Dragon 27, Fort Davidson Tower. You are cleared to land runway 09. Winds calm. Traffic is a C-130 on final approach from the north. Cleared to land runway 09. Dragon 27 has the C-130 in sight. Maria lined up for her approach, the aircraft descending smoothly toward the runway. The landing was textbook perfect, touching down with barely a bump and rolling out smoothly. She felt the familiar satisfaction of a well-executed flight, another successful mission completed. Dragon 27, turn left on taxiway Charlie and contact ground control. Left on Charlie, contact ground. Dragon 27. As Maria taxied back toward the flight line, she could see various personnel going about their duties. The base was busy as always, with aircraft coming and going, ground crews working on maintenance, and support personnel handling the countless details that kept a military installation running smoothly. And there, standing near the operations building, was Jennifer Walsh. The sergeant was watching the returning aircraft with what appeared to be intense interest, her face still showing the strain of the morning's encounter. She'd probably spent the entire time Maria was flying thinking about what had happened, replaying the conversation and realizing just how badly she'd handled the situation. Maria parked her aircraft and began the shutdown sequence, engines winding down as systems were secured. The post-flight routine was just as important as the pre-flight checks, ensuring that everything was properly documented and any issues were noted for maintenance review. Technical Sergeant Thompson was waiting as she climbed down from the cockpit. "How was the flight, Captain?" "Excellent, Mike. Aircraft performed perfectly. No issues to report." "Good to hear, ma'am. I'll get the post-flight inspection started." Maria nodded and began walking toward the operations building to complete her mission debrief. As she approached, she could see Jennifer still standing nearby, clearly wanting to approach but uncertain about how to do so. The sergeant's earlier confidence had been completely replaced by nervous anxiety. "Sergeant Walsh," Maria said as she passed. "Captain," Jennifer snapped to attention. "Ma'am, I wanted to apologize again for this morning. I know I was completely out of line." Maria paused, studying Jennifer's face. The sergeant looked genuinely remorseful, her earlier arrogance replaced by what appeared to be sincere regret. "We'll discuss this properly after I complete my debrief. Report to my office in 1 hour." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." Maria continued into the operations building, leaving Jennifer standing at attention on the tarmac. The real reckoning was still to come, but first she needed to complete her official duties. Military protocol demanded that mission requirements take precedence over personal issues. The debrief was routine, covering flight objectives, aircraft performance, and coordination with ground units. Maria provided the detailed feedback that would be used to improve future training exercises, her professional competence evident in every aspect of her report. But even as she went through the familiar routine, her mind was already planning what she would say to Jennifer. The sergeant's behavior had crossed several lines, from basic military courtesy to more serious issues of respect and proper conduct. It couldn't be ignored or simply forgotten. As she finished her paperwork, Maria reflected on the morning's events. Jennifer's assumptions had been based on stereotypes and prejudices that had no place in a professional military environment. The sergeant had looked at her and seen someone who didn't belong, someone who couldn't possibly have earned her position through merit and competence. It was a familiar story, unfortunately. Maria had encountered similar attitudes throughout her career, though rarely expressed quite so blatantly. She'd learned to handle such situations with a combination of professionalism and firm correction, but this morning's encounter had been particularly egregious. The hour passed quickly, and soon there was a knock on her office door. "Come in," Maria called. Jennifer entered and stood at attention, her face a mask of nervous apprehension. "Staff Sergeant Walsh reporting as ordered, ma'am." "Take a seat, Sergeant," Maria said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "We need to have a serious conversation about what happened this morning." Jennifer sat down stiffly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Yes, ma'am, I understand." "Do you?" Maria asked. "Because I'm not sure you fully grasp the implications of your actions. Let me be very clear about what occurred. You made assumptions about my authority and my right to be in that area based solely on your personal biases. You then threatened to have me removed from a location where I had every right to be, performing duties that I was specifically assigned to perform." Jennifer's face flushed red. "Ma'am, I know I made a terrible mistake. I should have asked for identification first. I should have shown proper respect." "Yes, you should have," Maria agreed. "But this goes beyond just failing to follow proper procedure. Your behavior demonstrated a fundamental lack of respect for the rank structure, and the principles that our military service is built on. You allowed your prejudices to override your training and your duty. The words hit Jennifer like physical blows, each one highlighting another aspect of her failure. She sat silently, clearly struggling to find words that could somehow justify or explain her actions. "Ma'am," Jennifer finally said, her voice barely audible, "I don't know what came over me. I was trying to establish my authority in my new position, and I made assumptions that I shouldn't have made. There's no excuse for my behavior." Maria studied Jennifer's face, seeing what appeared to be genuine remorse and understanding. "Sergeant, let me ask you something. What made you so certain that I didn't belong there? What specifically led you to conclude that I was unauthorized?" Jennifer's discomfort was obvious as she struggled to answer. I I guess I expected someone in your position to look different, to carry themselves differently. I made assumptions based on appearance, and I was completely wrong." "Appearance," Maria repeated. "What exactly about my appearance suggested that I wasn't qualified to be there?" The question hung in the air between them, forcing Jennifer to confront the ugly truth about her assumptions. Her face grew even redder as she realized she was being asked to articulate prejudices that sounded even worse when spoken aloud. "Ma'am, I realize now that I was influenced by stereotypes and preconceptions that have no place in military service. I looked at you and made judgments based on factors that have nothing to do with qualification or competence. It was wrong, and I'm ashamed of my behavior." Maria nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty, Sergeant, but acknowledgement of the problem is only the first step. The real question is what you're going to do to ensure this never happens again." Jennifer looked up, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Ma'am, I want to learn from this. I want to be better. I know I've damaged my reputation and possibly my career, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right." "Your career isn't necessarily over," Maria said, "but it is at a crossroads. You can choose to learn from this experience and become a better leader, or you can continue down the same path and face the consequences. The choice is yours." Jennifer nodded eagerly. "I want to learn, ma'am. I want to be the kind of leader who judges people by their actions and abilities, not by their appearance or background." Maria studied Jennifer's face for a long moment, trying to determine whether the sergeant's remorse was genuine or simply an attempt to avoid consequences. Finally, she spoke. "All right, Sergeant. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to write a detailed report on this incident, including an analysis of what you did wrong and how you plan to prevent similar situations in the future. You're also going to attend additional training on leadership, diversity, and military bearing." Jennifer's relief was obvious. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for giving me this opportunity." "Don't thank me yet," Maria warned. This is your chance to prove that you can learn and grow from this experience. But I'll be watching, and so will others. Any repeat of this kind of behavior will result in more serious consequences. Is that clear? Completely clear, ma'am. Good. Now there's one more thing. In a few minutes, you're going to hear something that will drive home the lesson of this morning in a way that words cannot. When you do, I want you to remember how you felt when you realized your mistake. Remember that feeling and let it guide you in the future. Jennifer looked puzzled. Ma'am. Before Maria could explain, the base's public address system crackled to life. The voice that emerged was clear and authoritative, carrying across the entire installation. Attention, Fort Davidson. This is Control Tower. We have an aircraft requesting emergency landing clearance. The pilot has declared a minor emergency due to hydraulic system malfunction. The aircraft is being flown by Captain Maria Rodriguez, call sign Dragon 27. All personnel are to clear the emergency response area immediately. This is not a drill. Jennifer's face went white as the implications hit her. The same Captain Rodriguez she tried to have removed from the flight line that morning was now dealing with an emergency situation, demonstrating exactly the kind of skill and professionalism that had earned her the right to be there. That's not actually happening, Maria said quickly, seeing Jennifer's alarm. But it could have been. The point is, Sergeant, when you tried to keep me away from that aircraft this morning, you weren't just disrespecting me personally. You were potentially interfering with critical military operations that require specific skills and training. The lesson hit home with devastating clarity. Jennifer had been so focused on her assumptions about who belonged where that she'd never considered the possibility that she might be interfering with someone who was not only qualified but essential to the mission. Ma'am, Jennifer whispered, I could have caused serious problems if I'd succeeded in keeping you from your aircraft. That's right, Maria confirmed. Your prejudices didn't just lead to personal embarrassment. They could have had operational consequences. That's why this kind of behavior is so dangerous and why it cannot be tolerated. Jennifer sat in silence for several minutes, absorbing the full weight of what she'd learned. Finally, she looked up at Maria with eyes that showed genuine understanding. Ma'am, I promise you that I will never let my assumptions cloud my judgment again. I will judge people by their actions and their qualifications, not by their appearance or any other irrelevant factors. I hope so, Sergeant, Maria said. Because the military depends on people working together based on mutual respect and recognition of each other's capabilities. When that breaks down, people can get hurt. Jennifer nodded solemnly. I understand, ma'am, and I want you to know that I have tremendous respect for your skills and your service. I'm sorry it took this situation for me to recognize that. Apology accepted, Sergeant. Now, let's make sure you turn this experience into something positive. I want that report on my desk by tomorrow morning, and I want it to be thoughtful and comprehensive. This is your chance to show that you can learn and grow from your mistakes. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. As Jennifer left the office, Maria reflected on the morning's events. The encounter had been unpleasant, but it had also provided a valuable teaching moment. Jennifer seemed genuinely committed to learning from her mistakes, and that was encouraging. But Maria also knew that words were easy. The real test would come in the days and weeks ahead, when Jennifer faced similar situations and had to choose between her old assumptions and her new understanding. Only time would tell whether the lesson had truly taken hold. The story of what happened that morning would spread throughout the base, as such stories always did. It would become a cautionary tale about the dangers of making assumptions, a reminder that military bearing and competence came in many forms, and hopefully, it would prevent similar incidents in the future. As Maria returned to her regular duties, she felt a sense of satisfaction. She'd handled a difficult situation with professionalism and had potentially helped a young sergeant learn an important lesson. It wasn't the morning she'd planned, but it had been productive in its own way. The afternoon passed quietly, with routine administrative tasks and preparation for the next day's training exercises. Maria found herself thinking about Jennifer periodically, wondering how the sergeant was processing the morning's events and whether she was truly committed to change. As the duty day ended, Maria was gathering her things when Technical Sergeant Thompson knocked on her office door. "Captain, do you have a minute?" "Of course, Mike. What's on your mind?" Thompson entered and closed the door behind him. "Ma'am, I heard about what happened this morning with Staff Sergeant Walsh. I wanted you to know that several of us witnessed the incident, and we're all impressed with how you handled it." Maria raised an eyebrow. "Oh." "Yes, ma'am. Walsh has been causing some problems since she arrived. She's been questioning people's authority and making assumptions about who belongs where. What happened to her this morning was a long time coming." "I see," Maria said carefully. "And how do you think she's handling it?" Thompson shrugged. "Hard to say. She's been pretty quiet since you left for your flight, but I think she got the message loud and clear. Sometimes people need to be knocked down a peg or two before they can learn." Maria nodded thoughtfully. "Well, let's hope she takes the lesson to heart. Everyone deserves a chance to learn and improve." "Yes, ma'am. But I wanted you to know that your handling of the situation has earned you even more respect from the troops. Standing up to that kind of behavior while maintaining your professionalism, that's leadership." After Thompson left, Maria sat quietly in her office, thinking about the day's events. Leadership, she reflected, wasn't just about giving orders or making decisions. It was about teaching, mentoring, and helping people become better versions of themselves. Jennifer Walsh had made serious mistakes that morning, but she'd also shown the capacity for growth and learning. That was what Maria chose to focus on as she prepared to leave for the day. Everyone deserved a second chance, as long as they were willing to earn it. The next morning brought a new day and new challenges. Maria arrived at the base early, as was her custom, and found a sealed envelope on her desk. Inside was Jennifer's report on the previous day's incident, submitted exactly as requested. Maria opened the report and began reading, curious to see how Jennifer had processed the experience. The document was longer than she'd expected, running several pages of detailed analysis and reflection. Yesterday morning, I made a series of serious errors in judgment that demonstrated a fundamental failure of leadership and military bearing. The report began. I allowed personal biases and stereotypes to override my training and professional obligations, resulting in disrespectful treatment of a superior officer and potential interference with critical military operations. Maria continued reading, impressed by the depth of Jennifer's analysis. The sergeant had clearly spent considerable time thinking about what had happened and why. She'd identified not just the immediate mistakes, but the underlying attitudes and assumptions that had led to them. I realize now that my actions were driven by preconceptions about what military leadership should look like, Jennifer had written. I made assumptions about Captain Rodriguez's qualifications and authority based on factors that have no bearing on military competence. This was not only disrespectful but potentially dangerous. The report went on to outline specific steps Jennifer planned to take to prevent similar incidents in the future. She'd identified additional training she wanted to pursue, changes she wanted to make in her approach to leadership, and ways she could better serve the military community. I understand that my actions have consequences beyond just personal embarrassment, the report continued. They reflect poorly on the military as a whole and could undermine the confidence that personnel have in their leaders. I am committed to earning back the trust and respect that I damaged through my behavior. Maria finished reading and set the report aside, feeling cautiously optimistic. Jennifer had clearly taken the experience seriously and seemed genuinely committed to change. Only time would tell if the commitment would translate into lasting behavioral change, but the signs were encouraging. Later that morning, Maria was reviewing flight schedules when her phone rang. "Captain Rodriguez, this is Colonel Patterson. Could you come to my office when you have a moment?" "Of course, sir. I'll be right there." Maria walked to the colonel's office, wondering what might have prompted the summons. Colonel Patterson was the base commander, a respected leader who rarely called individual officers to his office without good reason. "Come in, Captain," Colonel Patterson said as she knocked on his door. "Please have a seat." Maria entered and took the offered chair, noting that the colonel's expression was serious but not hostile. "Sir, you wanted to see me." "Yes, I did. I understand there was an incident yesterday morning involving you and Staff Sergeant Walsh. I've received reports from several witnesses, and I wanted to get your perspective on what happened." Maria provided a concise but complete account of the morning's events, from Jennifer's initial challenge to the resolution in her office. Colonel Patterson listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making notes. "I see," he said when she finished. "And how do you assess Sergeant Walsh's response to the situation?" "Sir, she seemed genuinely remorseful and committed to learning from the experience. She submitted a comprehensive report analyzing her mistakes and outlining steps for improvement. I believe she deserves an opportunity to demonstrate that she can change."